background behind creating this course was realizing that there are so many questions that are specific to expats and international families when they divorce. There is really that need for a special training for them. And so I wanted to specifically target that population to help share some information and some tips to try and help you divorce in the smoothest way possible, really. So every week, starting from this week, I will be addressing a new topic. The topic this week is the 3 things to check before doing anything about your decision to divorce. And so this is really focused on that initial stage where you are just at the cusp of making the decision, but you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. And there's a few things that are very important to check before you do anything about your decision, in particular before speaking to your spouse about it, just to make sure that you are in control of the situation and that you have all the information you need to be going in with your eyes wide open. So why did I create this masterclass, and who is it for especially? The target, as I mentioned, is really anybody who is in an international context. I think a lot of the tips I'll mention apply also to local divorces, but this was really designed with the expat or the international couple in mind because of the specific issues that come up in that kind of situation. You don't have to have started the divorce. You can be at any stage of the process. If you're just thinking about it and gathering information, that's great. You're getting this information just at the right time. Otherwise, if you're going through divorce, this can help you still to make sure that things go on track, stay on track, and go as you want it. The objective really is to allow people to reduce conflict so that they can divorce faster, cheaper, and better. So by avoiding destruction and the chaos that comes from the conflict that usually comes from divorce, people can get divorced faster. They don't spend fortunes on lawyer fees, and they preserve their own mental health. And what that means is that they're then able to move on with their life after divorce on a much stronger footing. They're not an emotional wreck. They're not broke, and their relationship with their ex is in good terms. And that's particularly important when you have children, of course, and you're going to have to co-parent with this person for a while afterwards, making sure that you can have a divorce experience that doesn't destroy your relationship completely, and especially that doesn't impact the children negatively, is going to be really important. So anybody who's concerned about any of those points, who recognizes themselves in these bullets, this is really who the prime audience for this course is. The reason why I decided to organize this masterclass is because there's a lot of information out there. When I went through my divorce, I remember trying to gather information. You've got Facebook groups, and you've got Instagram, and you've got websites on Google, and videos on YouTube, and what your friends say, and what your brother's cousin did. All of that information is coming at you, and some of it might be true, some of it isn't. Some of it is specific to that person's experience and doesn't necessarily apply to yours. Some of it relates to getting divorced before there was no fault divorce in the UK, for example, or getting divorced in another country. So there's a lot of rumors, a lot of hearsay, and a lot of misconceptions, to be honest, about divorce that lead people to make the wrong decisions. So what I wanted to do today is to really kind of put everything on the table and share information that is vetted, that is coming from an expert, so you're not letting your decision-making be dictated by rumors, effectively. And so in the same vein, I'm a big believer that knowledge is power. And if you understand your rights, if you understand what you need to know before starting the divorce process, then you've got power, you've got control over the situation. Divorce isn't just happening to you. You're able to manage your divorce as you would a project, and to make sure that you get to the outcomes you want to get to. And what I've noticed is that a lot of people make mistakes during their divorce because it's, in a lot of cases, their first divorce, and they don't have any way of knowing any better. But those mistakes can really last a lifetime. On the financial side, once you've made financial arrangements and you have a financial order, very hard to vary that order. And you're going to have to live pretty much with the arrangements you've reached for a while after that. And that might impact your financial health in the long term. With regards to children, there's more flexibility because it's accepted that children grow up and things change. But still, you're going to have to live with that arrangement for quite a while, and it's going to be hard to change things as they evolve. So trying to get things right from the onset is really the key. Avoid spending the next 10 years of your life renegotiating the terms of your divorce and potentially even going to court. What's important to understand is that every situation is unique. You are the CEO of your own divorce. I'm not here to tell you what to do or to guide you in a forceful way. What I'm trying to do is to be one of the experts that you're hearing out to gather the information to make those decisions. So the CEO will speak to their IT lead, and they will speak to an HR person, and they will speak to somebody in marketing to make those decisions. And you're in the same situation. You're going to want to speak to a coach. You're going to want to speak to a lawyer and any other professionals, potentially a financial planner or a family mediator, whoever is relevant to your situation, so that you can then make informed decisions. And my job with my clients is to help them look at all that information, overlay the emotional side of things, and make decisions that work for them and their children. And it's not a one size fits all, and it's not based on what your cousin Bertie's friend did. So that's really the essence here behind this masterclass, is sharing information with you all to give you the power to make the right decisions. Now, I don't know if you know me and how you ended up signing up for this course, but I wanted to take a minute to introduce myself. So I am a Franco-American. As you can tell from my accent, my mother's American. I have been an expat for over 25 years. I've been in the UK for, I think this is 15, but I think it's closer to 16 now. So for 16 years, I've been living in the UK. I'm in London, and I am a divorced mother. I've got two preteen girls, and I got divorced about 10 years ago. I have lived most of my life outside of my home country, and I have married in an international. On the professional side, I am a certified divorce coach, which means that I am specifically trained in alternative dispute resolution, in helping people find solutions for their family conflicts out of court. That's really my emphasis, and you will see throughout this whole presentation, my ethos is really to try and keep conflict to a minimum and to help people divorce in the most peaceful way possible so that they come out of their divorce still strong, not impoverished, and with a decent relationship with their ex. So that's really where my focus is. As you know, I specialize in helping expats because I know there are a lot of extra complexities that come into play when you're not in your home country, when you're getting divorced potentially in a different language, and when you potentially have properties in different places and might end up co-parenting long distance. So there's a lot more to deal with than in a traditional divorce. So my mission is really to combine my personal experience of divorce with my professional experience. So my personal experience is a very mixed one, and I'm really talking firsthand experience when I say that amicable divorce is preferable, because I've experienced both with the same person, ironically. We didn't get remarried, but when we first divorced, it was very amicable. We weren't friends, but we kept it civil, and we managed to find agreements among ourselves. And we shared a lawyer, and it cost us £1,000 and 3 months of our life. And then he moved in down the street from us. The kids went back and forth. It was very fluid. We managed to collaborate, even though we weren't friends per se. What happened is a few years later, he met somebody new. And that completely changed the dynamic. And that led to him moving abroad without notice and stopping any kind of child maintenance payments and just disappearing basically off the face of the earth. And the problem I had at that point was that my ex refused to speak to me. He only wanted to speak to me via lawyers. And so that made any kind of communication or negotiation impossible. And that means that we had to get lawyers that costed quite a lot of money. We had to get lawyers across 3 jurisdictions because this conflict involved France, the UK, and the United States. So you can just imagine the number of bills we were both getting, the amount of tension that this created. And I remember the physical toll it took on me, just the stress of that situation. aside for having to support my children through their father disappearing, I had to deal with all this conflict, all this administration as well from the legal process. And what I've noticed is that the impact in the long term of that litigation was really profound. It took probably about 7 or 8 years for me to even be able to look my ex in the eye after what all happened. Forget about co-parenting and making decisions collaboratively. That took even longer. So the difference in our ability to work together as a team, as a parenting team, was very deeply affected by the fact that we had gone down the litigation route rather than negotiating things amicably. Needless to say, the impact on our children was, just as proportionally different, and they also felt the blow a lot more when we went through that second iteration than originally. So I bring that experience from what I've witnessed in the context of an international divorce across many jurisdictions, and with that experience of both the negotiated amicable route and the contentious route. And what I do is I combine that experience with my professional training. So as a certified divorce coach, I am specifically trained on negotiation techniques and on conflict management, as well as on the business of divorce. And so that's all of the knowledge that I have acquired through my training, but also through working with my clients over the past 7-8 years. I have built up experience, and I'm able to combine that with my own personal case to help people manage their divorce better, and ultimately to help them avoid making costly mistakes, which is really what it boils down to. So there's all kinds of coaches out there and very different approaches. Some of them specialize in high conflict divorce. My specialty is expat divorce with a very strong emphasis on a negotiated solution, which doesn't necessarily mean you are best friends and everyone's singing Kumbaya. It just means that you're managing to reach an agreement out of court in a less destructive way. And so my philosophy really is built around 5 different pillars. The first is the importance of having a plan. Now, I was a project manager for many years, so that's probably just ingrained in me. But the more you can plan ahead and prepare for your divorce, the more control you have over the entire situation and on how it unfolds. So if you come into it prepared with good expectations, realistic expectations of what might happen, good understanding of the process, but a understanding as well of the timelines and the costs involved, then you have much more control over how things pan out, and it avoids you feeling overwhelmed. The second pillar, I think, is pretty obvious. It's to put your children at the center. And that is, something that seems very obvious to say, but in the turmoil of the divorce, a lot of people kind of lose focus on that. So if you have children, always reminding yourself of what's best for them and making that a top priority before any kind of ego kicks in, any kind of revenge or need for level setting comes into play. The main focus is what is best for your children. What this means is that you want to be thinking long term. Your children are whatever age they are today, they are going to grow, their needs are going to change, they're going to live through different times in their lives that are going to have different financial implications and need different levels of supervision from you and your co-parent. So what you want to be doing here is really making sure that during the divorce conversations, you are anticipating those events. Think about what happens when your children go to secondary school. Think about what happens if they need tutoring, if they need braces later on. All of those steps in their lives that are likely to happen and that you're going to have to manage with your co-parent. Similarly, on the financial side, thinking long-term is essential. As I mentioned, there are very long-term implications of the decisions you're making, and those are often very hard to vary later on. And making sure that you are thinking about your own situation in the long term and whether the agreements you are making today allow you to have that long-term financial health and stability that you need, going to be really important. It's very common that, in the middle of all of this turmoil, people are so focused on just fixing the current situation. That's already so overwhelming in of itself. They forget to think about the future. And that means that they have to constantly renegotiate their agreements. And who wants to spend their life renegotiating things with their ex, really? As I mentioned before, conflict, it's inevitable in any divorce. There's going to be disagreements. There's going to be things that that one of the two has to give up and the other one is going to get. There is going to be some conflict, but keeping it to a minimum, managing it in a way that is healthy so that when you need to make decisions together later on, especially if you're co-parents, you can do that in a more effective way. And you've learned and had the precedent of having it work the first time around. And that means that you'll be able to collaborate better and to communicate better. So a lot of the work I do with my clients is around communication skills. Communication during the negotiation. How do you keep the negotiation going? How do you make sure that you're getting the information you need to make proposals that are going to work for everybody? But also communication after. And once you're past that phase, again, if you're co-parenting, you're going to have to make a lot of decisions. You're going to have to keep each other abreast of developments. And so the more that can happen in a constructive manner, the better. And really what you're doing is you're shifting from being a romantic couple to being a parenting couple. Your relationship doesn't end, it just changes. And so the communication needs to remain throughout. So by managing conflict as a whole, you manage to really reduce your costs because you're not paying for ridiculous legal fees. You reduce the stress, as you can imagine. Any conflict triggers stress. And if ultimately you get better outcomes because you get a negotiated outcome that you have opted into, that you have developed with your spouse, rather than an outcome that's been dictated by a third party like a judge who doesn't even know either of you. So how do I support my clients? Coaches work through a variety of different issues that arise during divorce. Today, we're mostly talking about the first one on this list, which is preparing logistically and emotionally for the separation. But I support people throughout the life cycle. So from that initial preparation, when you've decided to divorce, but you don't really know what to do next, and ideally even before any conversation has happened with your spouse or with your children, all throughout the separation. So throughout the negotiation, throughout the challenges when you feel like those negotiations are stuck or stalling. I help my clients to strengthen their communication skills, to handle their emotions in a way that allow them to have constructive meetings when they're having those negotiations, whether it's with the family mediator or with lawyers or just directly with their ex, trying to disassociate the emotions from the business side of the conversation, which is really where the one you want to focus on. And that helps you to build life after divorce. So I support a lot of people in adjusting to their new reality, learning how to manage a household budget on their own for those who haven't necessarily have that role during the marriage, learning how to become a single parent, and also finding a new balance in your co-parenting relationship with the children, going back and forth potentially between one parent and the other. And then I've got clients who come to me years after the divorce because things have changed. Someone's met someone new, or they're moving abroad, or whatever it might be. And they need to think through their co-parenting relationship and readjust it because things have changed. And so building that sustainable relationship is really key to ensuring that things go smoothly at that stage. This is a slide that I like to share just because it's important to remember that divorce is not just a legal process. A lot of people have the reflex of making a lawyer their first call. And yes, you need to understand what the law says, but more than a legal process, divorce is a life process. It's a transition in your life, and it affects a lot of dimensions that have nothing to do with the law. So if you look at this roadmap, the decision-making process, it's got nothing to do with the law. That's your decision, your personal arbitration of whether you think that you can continue to live with this person or whether you want to end the marriage. So that's very much a personal conversation, and that's usually where I start my relationship with my clients. First steps, like informing your spouse that you want to divorce, telling your children, defining your divorce team. All of that happens. It's not part of the legal process. It's part of the preparation process for this life transition. And it's only from that point onwards that you enter the legal process. And even that phase isn't just legal, it has a lot of emotional and personal implications. But the part that's between those two yellow lines is really the core of the legal process. And as you can see, it's only two of the five steps. So during the legal process, you will be trying to negotiate an arrangement out of court. There's a strong focus these days in the UK, in a lot of countries around the world, to try and resolve family disputes out of court. So there's always a first attempt at negotiation. That might be mediation, that might be through your lawyers or directly, but there's a lot of different options there to help you try and negotiate. If that negotiation fails and it goes to court, you're still following that route until finalization. So whether it's an agreement you reach collaboratively or it's one that is imposed on you by a third party, ultimately there is a decision made and you have a final agreement. You know where you stand financially and with regards to the children. That doesn't mean it ends, because you may have finished the legal process, but your life isn't finished and you've got to now adapt to a whole new way of living, potentially to being a single parent, potentially to going back to work for those who weren't working before. You have to find a new equilibrium in your own life, your social life, and also in your relationship with your ex, your co-parenting relationship with them. So that road is many years. And for some people, it's a longer road than others, but there is always more that happens after the legal process is final. And unfortunately, that's a stage at which a lot of people's support system is kind of demobilized, because your friends and family have been supporting you for a number of months or years through all of this, and they're probably a bit tired, and your lawyer's gone because this isn't legal anymore. And so working with a coach allows you that continuity and that ongoing support. It's important to realize that there is still a lot going on in that phase that happens after the final signing of the papers. So there are three main elements that I think are the key to divorcing successfully. The first is preparation, which I think I've hammered through quite a few times. The second is mindset, and the last is support. And so I help my clients through those three. I'm going to give you an example. This is the story of Emily, and that's not her real name, but one of my clients kindly shared this testimonial. And Emily came to see me. She had been trying to divorce from her husband for about 9 months. She'd spent over 15 grand in lawyer fees, and they had gotten nowhere. She didn't have a plan. She didn't know how she wanted to do it. She hadn't defined that with her lawyer, with anybody. She was just kind of going with the flow and doing what her lawyer was saying, and filing paperwork and paying a fortune for filing paperwork, and wasn't getting her any closer to where she wanted to be. And she was just reacting, emotionally every step of the process. So when she came to see me, she was really upset. She felt very much lost. She wanted to move on with her life and to conclude this divorce. She felt completely stuck. And so the first thing we did is kind of just reset everything. We started from the beginning and thought about what her plan was, what her objectives were. Where does she want to be after this divorce? And how do we get her there? And once she had clear objectives, the roadmap to take her there was fairly clear. And so we then built that strategy together to help her to reach those agreements. And what happened is that within a few months, she started to have conversations again with her spouse, and they were able to start having, level-headed conversations again. And she didn't need a lawyer as much, so she only spent another 2 grand on lawyer fees, mostly to write up the agreements they managed to reach. And so within 8 weeks, they were pretty much. So the power of having thought through her strategy, of having had support from somebody who was informed and who could help her make the right decisions, and of managing her emotions and disassociating that from the process, was really, really important in her experience. So I'm going to dive into my 3 tips, the 3 things that you need to check before starting your divorce. The first one, in an international context, is to check what is the best jurisdiction for you to divorce in. Where jurisdiction is a fancy word to say the location of your divorce. But the location of your divorce dictates all of the laws that are going to apply. So it's an important decision. A lot of my clients are very overwhelmed by this decision, partly because it's one of the biggest ones they have to make very early on in the process. Aside from the one to actually divorce, this is the next big one. And so it makes people very nervous. The reality is there are quite a bit of differences from one country to the other in terms of the laws and in terms of how divorce unfolds. But at the end of the day, you all end up with a divorce and you all move on with your lives. So it's not something that needs to become a massive issue, but it's definitely something to consider carefully and to think about. The challenge that I see with a lot of people in an expat situation is that they have choices between different countries to divorce in because they have ties to different countries. And there is usually one country that is preferable for them, for that individual. And so the tendency is to try and file first in that jurisdiction, secure it, to avoid the other person saying, no, actually, we're not getting divorced there, we're getting divorced here. Now, they can still file and contest your jurisdiction, the jurisdiction you choose, but in most cases, you end up getting divorced where the first person filed. And that's going to dictate how the process unfolds, but also all of the rules and laws that are going to apply to that process. So it's really important, if you have ties to various countries, to speak to a solicitor or a lawyer in each of those countries. And what you want to understand is, first, can I get divorced in this country? Is this a country where we would have an option of getting divorced? And second of all, what kind of results can I expect given my situation and my concerns if I got divorced in this country? Those are going to be really important considerations. Now, aside from the results, so, you might get more child maintenance in X country than in Y country, there's a lot of other things to consider. It doesn't cost as much to get divorced in every country. Some countries have very expensive legal fees. The UK is one of them. The UK is a lot more expensive than getting divorced in France, for example. So understanding how much you're looking at in terms of budget, that might be something that you take into consideration, or that might even drive your decision. Understanding the different grounds for divorce in each country. Some countries have no fault divorce, like in the UK. Others require you to prove that somebody did something wrong in the marriage. Understanding the timeline associated with divorcing. In Canada, for example, you have to have been separated for at least 2 years to file for divorce. That might be something you're not willing to do. And if Canada is one of the countries you could be divorcing in, that might be something that's a deal breaker for you. Another thing to consider is translation costs. If you have all of your documentation and all your correspondence with your spouse is in a language, and you decide to file in a country that speaks a different language, you're going to have to translate all of that. And that costs a bit of money, but it takes time, and it's just an extra thing to do. So you want to make sure that you're looking at all the dimensions in making this decision. But the most important thing here is that you need to make that decision ideally before telling your spouse that you want to divorce, because you want to be able to know right away where you want the divorce to happen, and ideally to file quite quickly after telling them so that you can secure that jurisdiction. The second thing to check is, what does divorce require? So now you've decided what jurisdiction you want to get divorced in. What does it take? What are the waiting periods? How long does it usually take? What do I need to do in terms of documentation? Some countries like the UK don't require you to have a child arrangement or a financial order. You can get divorced and not have that in place. In France, you have to have both. It really depends from one country to the other what you're going to have to face in terms of the process itself. Another thing to think about that often comes up and people often forget, the immigration implications. If you get divorced, what happens to your visa? Are you allowed to stay in this country on your own terms, or are you there on a spousal visa? With Brexit in the UK, we've had more and more people who aren't secure, especially Europeans who used to be able to just stay in the UK no matter what, now are only there because they have a spousal visa. And if they don't have indefinite leave to remain, they won't be able to stay after they divorce, or actually even after their relationship breaks, so before the divorce. So checking that early on is going to be really important. It's important to understand what kind of financial information is going to be required to divorce. In the UK, we have a financial disclosure process. It's not as formal in other countries. Again, what kind of documents am I going to submit? How long does it take? How much does it cost in terms of lawyer fees to get that documentation pulled together? All of that is going to be really important to understand to make sure that you know what to expect when you start this process and you're going in with your eyes wide open. The last thing I'd flag here is understanding also divorce options. So, not just the grounds for divorce, but options to resolve your divorce conflict, for lack of a better word, your disagreements. A lot of countries use family mediation. Some have collaborative law. Others have arbitration. Some have all of them. So understanding within that country, what are the different options for non-court dispute resolution will be really important, because that will allow you to, first of all, decide which one you think is the best for your context. But also, when you tell your spouse eventually that you want to divorce, you can articulate that preference already and encourage them to go down that route. And you're able to articulate the value of going down that route, how much it'll cost, how long it'll take, why you think that's the best option. So it's really about gathering all of those facts and making sure that you're fully informed about what to expect from the divorce process wherever you're deciding to divorce, and having all of that information so that you know what's ahead of you and you again feel in control. It's not just happening to you and hitting you at random times. You know exactly what's coming next. The third thing to check is the implications of moving abroad. So this comes up a lot in international divorce because a lot of my clients are international couples, so they are binational. Sometimes some of them have several nationalities. And it's quite natural that in the context of their divorce, they wonder whether they should go back to their home country. It's a natural reflex, just like a turtle who goes back in their shell. You're in a moment of vulnerability, of change. And actually, a lot of the time, the idea of going back somewhere familiar, where you have your friends and family, can be really tempting. As much as possible, it's worth having that conversation with yourself before doing anything, because you're not going to negotiate your arrangements in the same way. So if you are in a position where you can make that decision before proceeding with a divorce, that will be incredibly helpful. It doesn't mean you can't change it later on. You can adapt things as you go. But if you start your negotiations on the basis that you're staying, for example, and 6 months down the line decide that actually you're going to move back, you're pretty much starting all over again. So if you can have that defined from the start, you avoid that issue. Now, you can still start on the assumption that you're staying here and build in clauses in your arrangements for what would happen if you did move abroad, especially with regards to the children, right, or to child maintenance. So you can build that in. But again, it's hard to plan for things ahead of time that are, so abstract at that stage and take so many possible shapes and forms. So as much as possible, trying to be clear in your mind about at least the short term, the next 2 to 3 years, where do you want to be, so that the terms of your divorce can be negotiated accordingly. And again, with regards to the jurisdiction, if you think you're going to be moving back, during the divorce or right afterwards, you might choose to get divorced in the country where you're going to be moving to, because then the divorce agreements are enforceable there. So if your spouse stops paying child maintenance, you can have that enforced locally. You don't have to go chase them in another jurisdiction and get a mirror order, etc. So it just makes things a lot easier if you can have that early on decided. There's a lot of things to take into consideration. It's not an easy decision, especially at a time where there's already so much stuff changing around you and so much uncertainty. So it's not always possible to make that decision early on. But in thinking through that decision, always think, of course, of what that would be for the children, what kind of schooling they would have in the new country, if they would be closer to family. That's all going to be important anyway in making a case to your spouse about them moving abroad, if your plan is to take them with you. Think about your professional situation. Will you have the same opportunities? Do you have to quit your job and find a new one there? Or can you work remotely in your current job? What happens if you lose that job? How will that work? Really think about the overall affordability of the transition. Some countries have very expensive healthcare, for example. If you're self-employed and you're thinking of moving to the US, well, actually getting health insurance is going to be an expensive thing to get and a very important thing to get. And so you need to build that into your budget. And so really thinking through all of the costs implied in moving abroad versus staying here, doing that budget will really help you to make an informed decision and to make sure that it's driven not just by the emotions, but also by a rational, logic behind it. And if you can't decide what to do, as I said, you can decide later on. It's not the end of the world, but if you're in the middle of the negotiations, it might frustrate your spouse that you're suddenly changing everything. And if it's a few years later, it does require renegotiating. So the more clarity you can have, the better. Are there any questions before I move on? All right, so let me just recap to be clear about my three main messages. If you're going to remember three things from what I said today, take time to prepare. Before you do anything, gather the facts, speak to people, get informed. And then that was my first and my second. And then my third point is location matters. It really makes a difference where you get divorced, and you want to make sure that that's something that you're in control of and it's a decision you're making consciously. So as much as you can, especially if you're the decision maker, you have the power to file first. Try and make sure that you have fully considered the implications of where you're getting divorced and that you understand the pros and cons of each of the options. So if you're somebody who is confused about what divorce entails and how it all works, I'm your person. Similarly, if you're feeling completely overwhelmed by all the decisions that you have to make in the context of your divorce, you're not alone. Everybody faces that. It is a very overwhelming time. Get support. I'm definitely here to help and direct you to the right professionals to help you get the right information as well if you're missing some information. Well, then if you're worried about making mistakes, again, speak to a specialist, somebody who knows about international divorce, someone who knows about the process of divorce, not just the emotional side of divorce, and who can guide you without going to see a lawyer who's going to cost you a fortune and take a long time to take it all through the litigation route. So I wanted to make a special offer today. For those who joined the call, there is a special offer that you can input into my free discovery call form. If you scan the QR code, you will get straight to that form. This allows you to book a free 30-minute session with me where we can talk about your situation. I can answer your questions. I can explain to you how I work and what kind of support I can offer in your specific context. And it's a great opportunity to get to know each other and to make sure that there's a good fit. And if you want to, we can then continue to work together. So if you enter in that form, in the comments box, if you enter the code expat offer, then you will be getting £200 off your first bundle of 9 sessions. That's a really big discount. So don't forget, you enter expat offer in the comments box and you will get those £200 off. I will automatically know that you've come to this masterclass and that this offer applies. We can of course discuss it in our discovery class if you have questions, but you will get £200 knocked off your bill right off the bat just for putting that code in there. We'll also share with you my long distance parenting plan, which is a template that you can leverage to help think through parenting arrangements if you and your spouse are going to be living far from each other. It doesn't have to be different countries. It's the logistics of just living far from each other, even in the same country. How does that all work? What are the things you need to think through to make sure that that goes smoothly? And this could be a really good source of information informing your decision to move abroad or not, or to move back home, because this will give you an idea of the kind of things that you'll have to put in place and some of the challenges you might have to face. So don't forget, you enter the code expat offer when you book a discovery call. The QR code will take you straight to that form, and that will give you £200 off your first bundle of 9 sessions. In case you didn't get all this information when you booked, this is my website, thedivorceandseparationcoach.com. There are a lot of free resources on there. Again, my point is to help people get the right information. So I am putting out so much content on a daily basis. I publish articles very regularly. I release podcasts every week with all kinds of specialists. I have videos. There's a lot of resources on there. It'll give you a really good idea of the kind of support I provide. It'll also give you a lot of information that you can access for free. My email is chloe@thedivorceandseparationcoach.com. Feel free to drop me an email. I'm always happy to respond. You can also send me a text or a WhatsApp message or call me if you'd like to. I am more than happy to engage with you and to share some information, some content, some support for you, and see how I can help you through this transition of your life. Thank you very much for joining me today. I will have another session next week, and I look forward to seeing you there. And feel free, if at any point you have any question, to reach out to me and to book a free call if you want us to discuss your specific situation. Thank you so much.